It's sad, but after 33 years of teaching, this was the first year after all of those legislative decisions that I've thought of getting out of teaching.
These legislators, almost to a person with no background in education, believe that they know best about schools.
We're not stamping out widgets. We're training citizens, we're preparing scholars. That's what we do.
Public education can be successful, and there's plenty of school corporations that year in and year out proves to be successful.
The way we educate our kids is the most important infrastructure investment that we make. It's more important than roads and bridges and airports and prisons and everything else we spend money on.
The problem we have with testing in this country today is that, number one, we're using the wrong kinds of tests, and number two, we're using the tests in the wrong kinds of ways.
We are raising a generation of children who've been taught that there's only one right answer, there are no shades of gray, and that they must always pick the right answer or they'll be punished, their teacher might be fired, their school might be closed. This is absurd.
So why am I still here? That's a good question.
There have been reforms all over the world, certainly in these high-achieving countries, to focus on innovation, science, technology, problem solving, multiple foreign languages.
The dreamers of today are the doers of tomorrow. You want to talk about what a teacher can do? Start challenging kids to dream about doing things that are almost so far out.
What we know today is that charters and vouchers do not get different results from public schools if they're serving the same children.
I defy you to point to a top-performing country that got that way by introducing choice systems.
Come to my classroom. Spend a day with me. Come and see these kids. Come and watch them learn.
We have to protect public education, we have to respect teachers, and we have to recognize that public education has accomplished incredible things in this country.
Public education is not failing. It's very strong. And if you get involved in your public school, you'll find all the great things they're doing, and you'll end up supporting a lot more than what you think.
Okay, so we are going to begin our panel discussion, and we're so excited to have this group of Indiana educators with us today to talk about some of the things that came up in film. Any questions that you might have, we'll leave ample time to address those. And I'm really open to just taking a raised hand or a card if you're more interested in writing down your thoughts. You can at any point in the discussion raise something over your head and we'll come and retrieve those and try to bring them up here to address our panel. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Of course, to my immediate left is Rocky Killion, the film's producer and West Lafayette superintendent, also superintendent of the year for me. So please welcome Rocky. Sitting next to Rocky is Erika, an amazing, extraordinary teacher at Summit Elementary. And I might point out that we're particularly honored to have Erika here. She's in between chemo and is here with us. That's how important the conversation is, so we're just so honored to have a dedicated educator here. So, by Erika is if they look familiar, if they look somewhat similar, it's because they're siblings, brother and sister, and also a teacher at Summit Elementary, Ben Strawn. So thanks for being here. We really love to have the teacher voice on the panel because we've got future teachers in the room, so that'll be a nice thing to hear from your perspective. And last but not least, Randy Harrison is on the end here, and he's the AFT, or American Federation of Teachers, representative who was very instrumental in getting a classroom teacher in the Anderson area elected to legislative seat. And so we're going to get to hear more about that process. So welcome, Randy. Thank you. So I'm going to start out the discussion with just a couple of questions for each panelist down the row, and then we'll open it up. So I would love to first hear your reactions to the documentary film. What stands out to you the most as a professional in education? And Rocky, maybe you could talk a little bit about how this movie came about.
Well, I'm biased, so I think the movie's excellent. So we'll just get that right out of the way. It came about because 3 years ago we wanted to start a conversation about what was going on in public education. And we thought the best way to do that would be to create a documentary. We started out very small. We were just going to have some teacher discussions and interviews. And we kept reaching out to folks like Diane Ravage, Jamie Balmer, Mark Tucker, Linda Darling Hammond, and over the course of 2 years, our creative team and I traveled across the United States capturing those interviews. I wrote probably close to 50 letters to celebrities, seeing if they would be a part of it. Actually had a 30-minute conversation with Bill Cosby. He was interested in participating, but then he joined Michelle Ree's group and dropped out, which is hindsight probably pretty good for him. But Peter Coyote graciously agreed to narrate and donate his talents. And then after we had all the assets and the storylines, then Jack Lean, who is a student film at Purdue, he helped put together the entire story, and his mom did the narrations for Peter Coyote, and then we launched it in December of 2013 at the Long Center, Lafayette. Since then, it's been seen in over 7 countries by over 20,000 people. So far, so good.
Thank you. Erika, could you talk a little bit about what stood out to you as an educator?
Well, this is my second time seeing the film, and both times the thing that always stands out to me is how many of the actual teachers say, if you only came to the classroom and saw what it was like. And also the line, they act as if, the legislators act as if they don't have children. I think that I've always said that teaching is a performance art. It's strongly rooted in academics and having a strong academic background yourself, but it is kind of a show. And so it's a lot like trying to describe a Broadway show to someone, to tell them to come see it and then evaluate how great it is with that, but eventually you just go, oh, never mind, you should just get tickets, just go. And I think that that's part of the problem in education. Everyone has seen the show, and therefore they think they understand it, but none of us would go to see Wicked and say, I know how she's blind, and none of us would go to Les Miserables and say, oh, I understand how that barricade was put together. There are a lot of things, nuts and bolts to any kind of good performance that we don't see at the performance. And I think that because we've all been in schools, we understand the whole performance and the preparation, and I think that's the seat that the legislators are in right now. They think they understand the full performance just because they bought tickets to the show.
Yeah. And this is my second time seeing it as well. And just the shared, yes, teachers have this shared frustration, but the way that they're rallying around with each other, you hear the conversations in the hallways, the vented frustrations, but they're not getting down. They know the pendulum will swing back at some point. And I think it shows a nice sign of hope. And that, since there are future teachers in the room, that's a sign of hope right there. But yeah, like Erika said, you don't see how many hats teachers wear. Like, everybody's had education experience by being in the classroom, so that automatically makes some people in their minds experts. And they need to see it. They need to see more closely how many roles that we play, from being a teacher to being father to being the guy who puts Band-Aids on. So yeah, I did that one today. Fixed boo-boos this morning. So yeah, we do so many different things, and I think it does a nice job showing all.
And thanks for getting this done for today.
Oh, no worries.
What is your perspective on that?
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for allowing me to be here, for everybody giving their time. This is about the 3rd or 4th time I've seen the film. I actually had brought the film to Anderson High School last May, and it knocked my socks off. I also have a point of clarification. Not only am I our AFT political activist campus, but I've been a classroom teacher for over 20 years. And one thing that still stings me, my blood boils, is the year that the DeHaan House wrote a campaign check for 6 figures. Anderson, an urban area that has slowly been drained with funding and the loss of kids because of other ed reform movements like property tax caps and open enrollment wherever you want to go, and budget cuts to education that year of $300 million. We really started struggling. And then the accountability systems came out. And we were within like 1 point of being a C school. And we used their appeal process. All of our leaders in my building, our 8-step team leaders, which we can talk about what that is if you'd like down the road, but all the players on trying to meet this accountability system said, we think we've got the appeal. We think we've nailed it. Our appeal came back, thanks but no thanks, you're still a D. And a couple of winters later, D schools now become F schools, and you're placed in priority. And there's probably a 3-hour epic movie about all the things that my faculty, my staff, my students, my community has gone through with us having a priority school. And so with me, and I do love the movie. I told Dr. Killion as I walked down there, I said, it never gets old watching it. But those are the things that resound with me. These are policies that are not fair at all. They're discriminative towards public education. There is no level playing field. And it just re-energizes me to come and speak and talk about it with anybody that will listen. That's my take on it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I also want to ask the entire panel to kind of update us, because one thing that for me the film does is educate just someone who's got little experience with what the legislative situation has been building up to some of these issues coming to head. So we saw, for example, the great change issue with Tony Bennett and his kind of fall, but Linda Ritz has since come in. But then this film kind of stops at a certain point. It debuted in December 2014, is that correct? 2013. So I wonder if you would update us. Where are we now and where are we going? What is important to know in terms of try to keep that?
Well, my take on it is the same people that got themselves in trouble with this past legislative initiative and then backtracked are the same people that are.
Can you briefly describe that for us?
Oh, sure. What was it? The restoration, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and the legislators that passed these laws, and then there was great fallout from it. And they're backtracking. These are the same people that are making decisions for public schools. And my take on it is this. At this point, I do not see the pendulum swinging back too much. I also believe that until the supermajority is held accountable for the decisions that they're making, they're going to continue to make the same decisions. And understand, I'm not against school choice. I'm all right with school choice as long as the choice is fair, equitable, and everyone's playing on the same playing field. For instance, when public tax dollars go to a parochial school or private school, there should be a public hearing on how they use those public dollars. And I've asked our legislators multiple times, make that a requirement. In public schools, we have to do that. I have held 2 budget hearings publicly to let taxpayers know where the money is going. The legislator who's in charge of that told me to my face, well, since we don't totally pay for everything that the parochial private schools do, they don't have to play by the same rules as public schools. When you have an unfair system and you continue to support that unfair system, you're going to have one part of the system winning at the expense of the other. And that, if you read anything about Dr. Deming, who turned around the auto industry for a you that when one part of the system wins at the expense of another, it's a catastrophe. The organizations are going to break because you cannot have one system winning at the expense of another. So what I think has to happen in order to push this back, we have to hold legislators accountable for the decisions that they're making. You heard Mark Tucker and Peter Coyote talk about those who have power aren't being held responsible. Those being held responsible have no power over it. It's the legislators making decisions, but then when those decisions don't work, who's accountable? Who they point the finger to and say that failed? Educators. But educators can't make those decisions because we're implementing the legislation that they passed. So we've really got to stand up by each community and push back and say, if you want school choice, make it fair, make it equitable, make them all play by the same rules. If you listen to Passe-Salzburg, school choice does not improve public education. It will improve parts of public education, but it will also hurt parts of public education. Do we want school choice or do we want school equity? Regardless of where you go, you get a high quality education. That's the choice they made in Finland, and that's the model that works.
I do want to give the other panels a chance, but a question from the audience, Rocky, to expand a little bit on that. So I wonder if you could talk about the difference between, for accountability for charter schools and public schools.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, but there are, you have a little bit of a difference with what the charter schools are able to do. For instance, I just was talking to Randy about this and wrote an article for the Indiana School Board Journal about this, that before standardized testing kicks in March, you will see across the state of Indiana and throughout the United States, charter schools kicking kids out and putting them back in public schools. You get in our state, you get the ADM count in February, which gives you the money. So what you're seeing is a lot of these private schools, the charter school movement, they get the kids for the money, and then prior to the time that standardized testing kicks in, some of those kids get kicked back to public schools. I've had that happen in Tippecanoe County. I've got several documented cases where that's occurring. And the reason that they do that is because they can and we can't. So if you want to try to measure accountability, what I would say is that if you're going to hold all schools accountable to the same requirements, private parochial schools have to, if you count those kids in February, you got to keep those kids, period. Just keep them and go through the standardized testing. Also, we should require that any school that takes a voucher, that they have to serve the same diverse population as a public school. Because if you really look at, and there are exceptions, but on whole, generalization, if you look at the privatization movement, they usually kick out the lowest performing kids, they skim off the top, as you heard in the documentary. Therefore, you can't readily measure public schools to charter schools or vouchers because we're not serving the same population. As Karen Francisco said, we now have two systems of education. One to serve all children, public schools, and another that can serve those that are chosen, are selected. So it's really not a question of accountability, it's a question of how do you scam the system so you look better than possibly your counterpart, and that's because of the legislative mechanisms that have been allowed.
I want to come back to that idea of accountability in a moment, but I want to continue down the panel to hear about how you would update us from the information here. But Erika and Ben, I'm also wondering if you would touch on not only where have we come politically since this film, but also how can teachers make sense of this whole realm of education policy? Are there ways that you navigate these tensions that are inherent in the way that education policy is headed? Do you see ways to stay hopeful and active in it at the same time? Can you talk a little bit about how you or other teachers you know are responding to the direction of education in in positive, proactive ways, or
Well, I think both Ben and I can't speak for all teachers, but I think we start with weeping and then meeting at next for our classrooms, of course.
Gotta always have a home base.
That's right. No, but I do think, again, you get into education because you want to serve the public. So you have a hope that the public also wants to serve back. So I think that you have this cyclical view of what you're doing. If you produce students who care, then they will care in political ways. And I think that that's what we do. In terms of getting our minds wrapped around it, we have lots of meetings and do lots of classroom discussions and in the break room discussions of what's happening and trying to advocate. I try to talk to as many parents as possible, both of students but also my own family members, my in-laws, and having to spread the word because, again, I think everyone, I think you heard Diane Ravitch say it a lot of time, I don't think the public has a clue. And I think they're starting to get a clue when the testing times have come out, and I think with this next round of ISTEC, when the testing times have come out again, they're starting to get an idea, they're getting an idea that that's not what they want for their children. Maybe they don't have a clear path of what they do want it to look like, but they know it's not sitting at a desk for multiple hours being assessed on something that they didn't even really have time to discuss in between the last assessment and this one. So I think that parents are getting an idea that this isn't where we need to go. I think as teachers we need to feel okay talking about how we also think it's not okay, that this is not us choosing it, that it is following the legislation that's been handed because we tend to be rule followers. We want to be professional, but we also want to be people doing the right thing. And drawing that line and walking it for an educator is a fine line. So I think that that's one of the discussions we have as teachers a lot.
Yeah, and definitely in the classroom you see, I've had more conversations with parents in the last 3 years of my teaching about what is happening than I had in the first 11 years of my teaching. Especially now, and I think the real firestorm that started most recently was when the testing times came out for the ISTEP test. And we saw third graders having 7.5 hours of testing. And that was just round one. And then they had to figure out how to cut down the tests really quickly. And now round two is coming up, and I can, hear the tar and feathers getting ready by parents because round two is coming up. It's coming up next week, and my kids have 9 testing sessions for 7.5 hours again. And that's on top of, we just did iRead, and we do 3 rounds of acuity, and we do SRI 3 times a year, and I teach somewhere in there. I'm not sure where it's at, but
how to listen carefully to testing.
Exactly. We become professional proctors at some point, but parents are now starting to get upset, and it's really easy when they come to me and go, why do we have this come out? I go, well, these are the rules that we're following. These are the people you need to talk to. You have like a list of legislators on your desk at all times saying, this is the letter you send them to. This person's who you're directed to. And they're starting to get angry. Not angry enough to really make a stink yet, but it's getting close. Hope.
Randy, can you talk about updating us in terms of what's happened in the last couple of
So
years?
kind of the gap between where the movie lets off and where we are politically today. I agree with a lot of that everybody else has said. What Dr. Killion mentions is the same players that have backtracked on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Some things that they have started to propose to do within one thing that just appalled me with in the accountability measures was it was tossed out there that maybe not charters, but voucher schools would get to pick their end of the year assessment, while everybody else had to stay attached to the ISTEP and the ECAs. And remember, I'm not sure if the experts in my district really know what's coming in terms of this year's ISTEP and ECA because it changes. We change the standards or the targets for our traditional, I don't even like to say traditional public schools. I use the word all caps, public schools, the ones that should be treated with utmost regard. We're going to hold them to some accountability target that continually changes. But they had talked there briefly, and I think enough people spoke up, to allow the voucher schools to pick their own test, while everybody else was held accountable to this one crazy test. And this may not still be in legislation as we talk charter schools, and it's kind of a secret. And if it's changed, please tell me, because that might show there is some hope in policy. But I've asked my senator from my area, Senator Lannon, is it still true that if you carry the charter, the sponsor, the CEO, whatever you want to call it, of a public charter, you and your group can still profit up to 3% of the ADM amount? And the last couple times I've asked that, the answer is, we think so. We don't think it changed. So my question is, with that deception in place, is a charter school really a public school? I think we've got it set up to where we're definitely headed to privatization. It's not a fair level playing field, and the same players, as Dr. Killion said, that are backpedaling have done some things, and they're going to continue to get real creative with it, and it's not fair at all. Back to the time on testing, I shared in the lobby with some friends out there, some of our panelists and our parent activists, I call our parent warrior, Kathy up there. 97% of the second semester in one of our buildings in Anderson right now is set aside for testing or test prep. And again, that's that test that we don't get to pick, and the target continually moves. So from my perspective, there leaves room for a lot of improvement with what's going on in the state capitol. And I've been lobbying, I've been visiting and speaking for my district in policy since about 2002, 2003. I've seen this train coming, getting momentum, and it is great to see that people are starting to pay attention.
Just to come back a bit, and I'm going to open it up to the audience after this, but I wanted to follow up about the choice systems, Randy, that you talked about, the schism between traditional public schools and charter schools. But I want you to imagine with me for a minute, and this may be a political reality in Indiana, and so what would you say if choice is here to stay? How can we work with that? I think that there could be commonalities or ways to tweak this. This current system certainly sounds like it has a lot of improvement to happen.
Is that for me to take this time?
This could be for any panelist, if you've got thoughts, quick thoughts about how can we work with the reality of the choice system to make it more equity.
In Anderson, with all the polling factors that are, we came real close to having probably no public school system in Anderson based on enrollment. And Ball State, which I'm a graduate of, say that, but trying to smile, they have promoted and carried charters in our area, one. And I know they make $900,000, close to $1 million off their charter program. We have to go speak publicly to try to prevent charters from coming to town to keep the doors of Anderson open. And after we spoke to shoot down this one charter school to prove that it was a duplication of services, that they couldn't outperform us, et cetera, I looked at Ball State's director of charter schools, Dr. Merritt, in the eye, and I said, do me one favor. If choice is going to be here to stay, do me two favors, Hold us all accountable. The same exact way. Put your charter teachers up against the teachers in my district and grade us the exact same way. And the second thing is, if you take the kid and you take the money, keep them the whole year. Don't send them back after the September ADM date or now the February ADM date when it's closer to test time. Grade us all the same and keep the kid if you're taking the money.
I'm going to open it up at this point if anybody in the audience wants to stand in.
Yes, my name is Bonnie Fisher. I'm a retired teacher from IPS, and I'm active now both in the Retired Teachers Association and an education think tank, Global Education Reforms Watch. Dr. Killion, I appreciated your introductory remarks about the what I would call a concerted and long ongoing attack for the public schools. You mentioned an ongoing and long-term negative publicity, defunding, teacher evaluations, extremely harsh and extremely punitive accountability for schools. So I have one question, and I'll phrase it with a Latin expression because I am a Latin teacher. The expression is cui bono. Who benefits from this concerted attack on the public schools? So I open it up to everybody.
Go for it, Rocky Killion.
Sure. Well, I think if you do your research, as we tried to do it for this, you will find out there's, as Diane Ravage talks about, they're not even think tanks. There's these foundations that are backed by billionaires that are trying to influence the education system because they want to break it open for profiteering. And Ed Eiler, who I highly respect, a retired superintendent from Lafayette, did a masterful study on this, starting with Friedman and going all the way through to where we are now. And he shows that the people that are profiting on this are the people that oversee these large foundations. Gates Foundation, Walton Foundation. Halleck is greatly involved in the American Legislative Education Councils. These groups are the ones that are profiting by this because they want a return on a dollar, they want investment, and they see this as a corporate model of implementation to run schools. And that's the fight going on. If you follow the money, you'll figure it out. I challenge all of you, if you don't believe me, challenge all of you. Go find out who's funding the legislators in the state of Indiana. And the majority of money is coming from those large foundations.
Ed Eiler.
Ed Eiler. E-I-L-E-R.
Thank you.
The ICPE number.
Yes.
I wish he was here now because I did have someone in the audience who is a microeconomics person, and with an instructor in an education course that really champions these metrics being used for supporting certain initiatives in education. The person is wondering about the statistical metric that could be used to argue against the notion that market competition of schools is what we need to create academic achievement. So I might pass that to Ed unless you have a thought about.
Well, if you look at the other countries that have implemented what we're implementing, their GDP has decreased. I'm talking about the Netherlands, I'm talking about Chile. There are several countries that used to rank pretty high academically, but when they introduced choice systems and introduced privatization, even from the international assessments, PISA, they've all dropped in the rankings. The countries that have come up in the rankings, whether if you're measuring it by GDP or if you're measuring it by international rankings, are those that have invested in early childhood, attacked poverty, raised the standards for the profession, and pay their teachers accordingly and respect them and allow them to make the decisions. If you look at those countries, Finland, Canada, etc., you will see that they have increased their GDP. You will see that their crime rates have gone down. You will see that the international assessments, they rank very high, and they don't have competition. So I'm just saying, if you really want to figure it out, go look at the models that are currently in place and compare and contrast. But don't take my word for it. Go research it.
Did I say a question?
I just had a question about this being an Indiana story. I mean, the film captures it as an Indiana story, and its possibility of being a national story, what that movement is. So I think the talk around the really recent legislation about the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act was an Indiana story, right? But it seemed to galvanize people across the states, not the world, the LGBT community. So I'm wondering what you think it would either take or how to cultivate some kind of conversation or coalition outside of Indiana? Because I have had several conversations with teachers recently from states that talk about, well, that's not, we have lots of testing issues, but we don't have these other issues. Our funding's generally okay, they're doing more autonomy and so forth. So they see it as this separate issue, not their state's issue. So how to work with an Indiana story but enlarge the space of the possible conversation. What the committee has panel any thoughts about that?
I've got a couple of thoughts, but I've been talking to them.
Well, I think first everyone needs to understand that children do not stay within the borders of the state. And then therefore, we have to stop looking at Hoosier children as Hoosier children. They are the world's children. So it needs to be understood that when the children's rights and families' rights are taken away from a public education that has equity, that you're taking away the rights of children and families that are the world's children and families. So I think there's two folds there. That one, it needs to be that perception. The reason you saw the national backlash with RFRA is because there was a clear perception that rights might or will be violated. I think that there needs to be a clear perception that in this case, rights are being violated. And the rights are of people who don't get to vote. They don't get to voice their opinion about it in the voting booth because they're children. So once that becomes clear, I think that that will encourage people to see that as more of a national story. And then when we say we've got these violated subjects now leaving the state, and they maybe didn't get the education that they deserved, and now they live next door to you, and you're in Illinois. So good luck.
I have a thought to follow up on it real quick. With the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, I thought that immediately. Public schools, especially the urban districts, they're struggling massively due to a lot of these policies. And my thought was, how do you make that connection and get people to understand that there is a problem as massive as what RFRA did? And I guess the only thing I can get them to understand is, from where I'm at in Anderson, I know my school district is being discriminated against. And my closing statement is I've tried to share this to get people in the LGBT community to help me, because I support them. I don't want anybody's rights trampled. Is my school teaches every kid every single day. I teach white kids, black kids, yellow kids, red kids, straight, gay, Protestant, Christian, probably Muslim. I teach them every single day. And the other schools that are now being held up on a pedestal better than mine do not. And that's discrimination. And why? Dr. Killion touched upon it at the beginning. They had their script. They had their game plan down to demonize public schools, to put this massive plan in place to privatize it. And it didn't happen overnight. And slowly, they sit around and they started coming up with it. The Alex and these big billionaire profit organizations started planning it, and they just started seeing the time and the opportunity to chip away at it. And it's come full force in their favor right now. But there has to be that connection that public schools are being treated as poorly as what RFRA would have done.
And I'd like to add that as a parent advocate, and recently at the public education rally up in Indianapolis, I gave a speech along with many other people, and there were like more than 1,000 people at the State House speaking up on behalf of Linda Ritz, who is about to lose her responsibilities and position on the State Board of Education. But anyway, when I gave that talk, somebody in the Democratic Party started to film it on his phone. And they put it up on social media, and it went viral. It was probably like 800 shares and maybe 35,000 hits. But when I went to look at it, I saw people sharing it in Colorado, I saw them sharing it in Florida, and they said, this is exactly what's happening here. This is our state legislature. And when I put things up, and Diane Ravitch has shared it on her blog, people have said, this, people contact me then, and that's the beauty of social media, it's networking. So Diane Ravitch has an organization called the Network for Public Education, and it's national, and we're all sort of fighting. There are individual nuances to it, but we're all fighting the same fight, which is the takeover of this part of our democracy.
Just to put a plug in for the Network for Public Education, there's a conference in Chicago in a couple weekends from now, so. Any other questions that I'm the panel audience? Okay.
I'd just like to ask how the climate of the anti-union sentiment has impacted education policy, because I hear that thrown out so much.
That's why I like to come in and state, and I share this outside, I share it everywhere I go now. Because I have 3 initials next to my name, A, F, and T, I'm already a bad teacher. And I understood that when I asked this question to a mentor. I said, I see some things, I understand checks and balances, I teach government, I'm thinking about being involved with a union. But there's that guy down the hall there that's not a very good teacher. And his response was, we get that all the time. You and I both know that gentleman probably should not be teaching. It's not our job to hire and fire, but it's our job to ensure that the individual has every ounce of due process as we go to remove and end a career. With that being said, since that time, so a few days ago, 1990, whatever it was, my local has brought to Anderson an evaluation system called Peer Assistance and Review, known as PAR. And we recognize we don't want the bad teacher. I don't want a bad teacher next door to me. I want quality teachers with me. I take pride in what I do. If you were to poll students that I've had in the 20 rough years I've been around, I probably rate pretty well and they learn stuff. You know, I had a gal just graduate that semester, post on social media, I can't believe I'm a political junkie and it's Harrison's fault. I must have made an impact. So back to that, we brought PAR to town so we can make sure we've got highly qualified, great instructors in front of our kids, professional educators, and if they hit a speed bump, we give them a chance, every chance possible, to prove their worth before we send them packing. But I think that message, there's still that, you know, just like from now on, if I hear the name Tony Bennett, I'm running as a public teacher. I think that perception is still there with AFT and the national, the NEA and ISTA in Indiana, that we're back. But I've worked kind of closely now with both entities, my AFT Indiana and ISTA. I've crossed paths with several people as we discussed this. And believe it or not, we're even starting to hear him on a panel with a superintendent. My superintendent back at Anderson's wanting me to get a group of teachers to go speak about another potential charter to come into town. We may not always agree with our local school board or our superintendents, but we have one common thread. We care about quality instruction and we care about our kids. It's other perceptions that have been out there, and that's again my job, and I'm glad this question was brought up, to prove that, you know, there are great teachers, whether they're in a union or not, whether they're a union leader. Just as in any other profession or any other segment of our profession, there's great superintendents. There's some that could be mediocre. The same with elected school boards and everything like that. But that's why our democracy, to bring it back to what Kathy is talking about, education is a big part of it. That's why we have checks and balances and elections and the ability to compromise, give and take. But right now, policy's not set up for that. It's all take from public schools, which have to be represented in some cases by AFT Indiana and ISTA.
To remember the game plan to destroy an organization, you spend billions of dollars to convince people that they're organizations filled with rotten apples. As an administrator in Indiana for 25 plus years, I've never had a problem firing a teacher as long as I did due process and had the documentation. It's not a union issue. You want to know why you have bad teachers in the classroom, you need to point fingers at the school board administrators. It's our job to deal with that. Always has been and always should be. You know, and the association is there to, as Randy said, make sure that individual rights are protected. Because you don't want something vindictive. I've seen principals, just because they have a personality conflict, want to go after a teacher. Wrong reason. You can't do that. Now, if they're doing something wrong, document, let's go.
I want to kind of switch gears to go to the everyday teacher's experience, what it's like for you in schools. And so, teachers, Erika and Ben, I wonder two things. These are from the audience. First, what has changed for you personally on your job since this legislation has crept in? And so that's the first part. Can you tell us a little bit about that change? And then also, what's a moment that you hold on to when you've had a bad day?
So the biggest change for me, I started my career teaching 6th grade at Child's Elementary School here in Bloomington. And then when Summit opened up, I decided to move over with my sister. Totally different population of kids. And then they hired me to teach 5th grade, and I did it for a week. And they realized they didn't have enough primary teachers and moved me down to 2nd. I never taught anything lower than 4th grade. And I sharpened pencils and tied shoes and freaked out a little bit at first because I wasn't quite sure what 2nd grade could do. And then they moved me to 3rd the day before school started the next year. And 3rd grade is a totally new beast. I've been there now 9 years. And the weight of the IRU test, like we got results yesterday. I have to make phone calls that are going to crush kids. Sorry. I did, just out of curiosity, the last acuity test. So, I took the reading portion and just put it in a Word document real fast to do a word count. Came out to 2,500 words. Time out. 2,500 words for a 3rd grader. At the lowest 80 words per minute is a half-hour of reading on a 60-minute test. That they then have to process, think, recheck, ask. It's brutal. They're 8. They can't. They shouldn't have to. What makes me feel better, though, at the end of the day, there's so many. Got an email the other day from a kid, a former 3rd grader. He's going to be the first kid to graduate from his family. And he thanked me. Those are moments. I had a kid come up to me yesterday and warned me. She said, just a heads up, I have poison ivy. Fair warning. And I hold on to that at the end of the day, because I don't even know why I should be fairly warned that she has poison ivy. I feel like I'll be attacked with poison ivy at some moment. But those are the moments you hang on to, because they're kids.
I think the thing that has changed for us is that in education, you've got 2 things going on right now. You've got 2 circles, like a Venn diagram, where you're trying to do what's best for the children. And you're also trying to get them across the goal lines of these tests. And it's not like there's not an intersection of the 2. There are times where you can be both doing what's best for kids and preparing them for a test that's asking academic questions. But like every Venn diagram, that intersection is a lot smaller than the rest of the circles. For me, I personally feel best when I'm on this part of the circle that's only doing what's best for kids. For me, professionally, I feel best when I'm in the intersection. For me, personally, I feel that I get pulled into the other side of the other circle way too easily and way too often, when at the end of the day, I realized I didn't do what was best for kids. I just stayed in that realm of getting them across the line for a task. And that's where the personal side of things, where I'm not in that intersection or not even in the other side of the circle at all. And I've let myself get pulled there through meetings and data breaks and how about this kid and what about that kid. And so I think that that's the part that's been the biggest change. And I want people to remember it wasn't always like that. And I haven't been teaching that long. I mean, I've been teaching 16 years, but I started when I was 21. So, I mean, I'm not old. Don't let the missing hair fool you. I mean, it's not like something that has to be. It can be better. It doesn't even have to be what it was, but it can be better. So that's what I will up to. That and stories like this, where I have a little guy this year who's on the autism spectrum. And at the beginning of the year, we were setting some goals for him, and he said he wanted to understand jokes. He recognized that understanding jokes was difficult for him. And just the fact that he recognized that and wanted to set it as a goal. Now, that's not going to show up on my stat that he recognizes jokes, but he got one of the most sarcastic teachers known to mankind. And so I was willing to help. And so April 1st comes along, and this little guy comes up to me first thing in the day. He said, "Hey, you might want to look at your desk." And sure enough, there's a little plastic ring spider, you know, the rings that you get at Halloween. I go, "Oh, there's a spider. How did you know?" And he just gave a wry smile. He goes, "I'm going to need that back at the end of the day." And I think about the fact that in this job, all jobs have those moments, but in this job, if you're having a good day, you get to witness change. You get to witness human change. And on a great day, you get to be the agent or catalyst for that human change. And that's the piece you have to hold on to through all the time.
And I am a classroom teacher, and I shared this a minute ago. Because my school system didn't write a campaign check, 2 D's became an F. We're on priority. We're talking about the impact of your daily life. There's a whole list of 9 things. You got 8 principles that you've got to do to turn your building around. The turnaround principles. And I had a colleague that said, "You're on my team. I'm co-chairing principle number 1." So we overlooked the whole building. So I kind of have an idea of what everything's about with this turnaround principle. And mind you, it could be worse because Glenda Ritz has kind of got the people in place to do this, and I trust Glenda. I've worked hard to help get Glenda elected. So I know it could be way worse. So what you have to do, one key thing that drove everybody crazy is you have to list your state standards and have that ready to roll for when, at any moment, the state will come in, their Region 4 for us will come in and they'll monitor your instruction. And, you know, we're all talking about, we know our standards, we do our lessons, we've got them, but now it's the fact we have to advertise it for them to come in. And the kids don't care. Harrison, 3.2, checks and balances, separation of power. We don't care about 3.2. Tell me about checks and balances. What's the standard number got to do with it? Well, I've got to do this because of state law. So we had posted ours, and I kind of can be a jerk. I have mine posted with little pictures that reflect checks and balances and stuff. All over. You walk, before you walk in my room, there's the standards. There they are on that wall in my room. They're hanging up on my desk. When we get a walkthrough evaluation, and it comes back and says, they weren't big enough for everybody to read clear across the room. Because they want to drive you so hard to show you're turning your building around, because I didn't put 3.2 separation of checks and balances so you can read it from here out to State Road 46. We got a bad mark. So you don't even want to know about the production that I put on the next time they come by and get a straight walkthrough. You want a show, you're going to get a show. And you know, one of the biggest things, there's tons of them. We talked about I call them the gimmick schools. I apologize if it offends anybody, but it's just quick because I can be long-winded. I am an educator. The valor cultures and charter schools do a great job of skimming. And I had a young lady, she was not even 2 months out of high school, went and told her story before the Select Commission on Education that summer would have been the summer of 2012. And that means she spoke in front of 25 senators and 25 representatives to say enough's enough. It's wrong. The cherry picking, she even used our behind closed door negative term. The cherry picking's wrong. It's harming the school I graduated from. Here's my story. And she said, I got accepted at another school based on my parents' income, my discipline record, my future plans, my income, what I've done. But my brother, who's not as academically as inclined as I am, and he's not old enough to work yet, he got declined. They created a rift in our family. And that's pretty much a highlight. When you watch a student go lobby on behalf of your school system and you were her government teacher. You know, there's tons of those things. So that's what makes it worth it, and that's why I guess I'm going to keep coming and telling the story.
I want to go back to you, unless I'm leaving again. Go ahead, Tina.
Ben and Erika, I'd be interested for you both to talk more about parents and the potential for parents to aid and become more active in talking about what's going on in schools right now. And I'm wondering if you might go into more detail about your thoughts in terms of how parents can kind of keep you on that Venn diagram, on that side of the Venn diagram that you talked about, or even in the middle, versus feeling as if you're being pulled into a realm that you don't want to be pulled into. So any thoughts?
Well, I think for me, I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine that I went to high school with, and she sent me a message. She said, okay, tell me about this whole charter thing and voucher thing, because my children go to a charter school. And she said, but I respect you, and I respect your opinion, so tell me how I'm hurting what you do. And I understand the sticky wicket that parents are in, because a lot of the changes we're talking about, like getting rid of legislators or getting rid of the legislation, take time. And as a parent, you're like, yeah, that's great, but my kid needs an education tomorrow. And I need to make sure it's happening tomorrow in a good way. So that's where it's insidious. They're preying on the mama bear instinct of protect the nest. So I think that a big part of it is I do understand from a parent perspective where you will be kind of maybe disinclined to support with your child staying in a public school if you feel like that's not a good choice for your child. And there will be circumstances in both charter and public schools or any school situation where maybe that's not the best choice for your child. So then you have to get to a place where I ask you, so then are you willing to look outside of your own child? And this is, again, this is a root and a philosophy that not everyone will sign up for. This is not about your child only. This is about the world's children who will impact your child in some way down the road. So maybe you did what was right for your child, but if there are dozens of other children left to not have what's right done for them, that will impact your child long term. In other words, you have to have a chess playing strategy for child raising where you're not just moving the one pawn you control, but you're thinking about what the other players are doing with their pawns and what the rest of the pieces mean to your piece. So I would advocate to parents to be a little bit courageous and advocate, yes, for your child in their circumstance, but then find ways to advocate for all children, because that is also advocating for your child.
And the only way to add to that also is just to invite them in. Invite them into your classroom as much as possible. Let them see what you do every single day. And I think the harder group to convince, because parents are starting to join up, at least from what I'm seeing, is the community members that have no kids, and make them understand it's just as important to them, because we're all going to be relying on these kids very soon to be functional people in society. And it's very important to them. I know your tax dollars need to go to public education because these people will be supporting us. And societal members, we need them.
I had a medical appointment the other day, go figure, with a radiation oncologist, and a young man came in along with the doctor and introduced himself. He said, I'm an internist, and do you mind if I sit in on this consult? And of course I was like, no, I work with internists all the time, and blah, 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 come on in, you know. And I looked at him, and he stepped out for a minute, and my husband looked at me and said, I think he's 12 years old. I said, I know. And I thought, the first thought, I said, I wonder what school he went to. Because this is what you have to understand. There's going to be a point where the person who makes sure that the cells you don't want in your body aren't in your body went to a school. And you don't know which one. You don't know. You don't know who those teachers were. So you have to make sure that all the teachers in all the schools are supported, because it does impact you. It does. And we want it to. We want it to be this really cool interlaced community of people who are all doing what's best for each other. That's what we want. So we have to put our momentary fears of what if my kid has a teacher who believes in spelling in a way I don't believe in spelling. Put that aside for a moment. Okay, yeah, you can have that spelling conversation with your child's teacher, but also look at the larger conversation and then do something. I always tell my students, in this day and age of technology and social media, there's no need to wonder without action. No longer do you have to wonder about something and then have no ability to take action. You wonder what Saturn's rings are made of? Grab one of the 5,000 devices you brought with you, besides the ones I've provided you, and look it up. There's no reason in today's society to wonder without action.
I have a final question before I ask panelists to give us advice or concrete action steps. So keep that in the back of your mind. We want that before we leave. But what would happen? What would happen if the public school system chose to stay in that side of the Venn diagram that's most comfortable working with kids the best way we know how, and ignore state guidelines? I'm thinking, Rocky, of your opt-out suggestion, if you could explain that proposal to the audience. What does it look like to do some form of passive resistance or collective action that can be productive?
Well, the threat of anarchy is you lose your profession, you lose your license. I mean, that's the threat. And you see that going throughout all the United States. There's a teacher in Seattle that's refusing to give her children the test, and she could lose their license. So, you know, in my brief 8 seconds of fame, about 6 weeks ago, I was asked, how could parents opt their children out of ISTEP? Well, if you listen to what I said prior to what was put on the air and what I said afterward, the whole thing would make sense. And the conversation goes something like this. There is no legislative mechanism to allow parents to opt out of standardized tests without it hurting the child or hurting the school. We have a 95% threshold requirement, no child left behind in the Department of Education. And if a child comes to school and a parent doesn't want their child to take the ISTEP, it's going to hurt the child, and it's going to hurt the school. Therefore, I would prefer that every parent would withdraw their child and homeschool them during ISTEP. That's the only legislative mechanism that I can figure out, which isn't even legislative. The only mechanism that I can figure out where it doesn't hurt the child, doesn't hurt the school. Of course, I'm not advocating for that, but that's what I would recommend. And of course, the only thing you hear is state superintendent a year recommends that children So I took a lot of heat from that, especially from legislators. I had one legislator tell me, you know, if that's what you're advocating as a superintendent, you could lose your license. You know, I'm near my career, go ahead and take my license. But once you go listen to the whole soundbite and listen to everything that I said, I'm sure Channel 13 will give it to you. So, you know, what we've got to do, in my opinion, is we've got to create legislative mechanisms that give parents, if you're into parent choice, then let parents have full choice. If they want their child to take the test or if they don't, give them that choice. You know, if you believe that they have to can choose which school to go to, why not give them the choice of the test? So, you know, I think that the thing, and I'll go ahead and give you my concrete steps. Every community needs to create a chapter of the Indiana Coalition for Public Education, as being done here in Monroe County. And then that chapter creates a report card to grade legislators on their support or lack thereof of public schools, and get that report card out to every voter. I truly believe if we were doing that in every county and in the state of Indiana, this whole thing turned around. Because I truly believe that the legislators would start calling and saying, "What did you give me an F for? You know, how can I get a C? How can I get a B? How can I get an A?" And if we start waking up the voters that aren't paying attention to this, I think that that's a concrete way to turn the tide.
I would say two things. One is that community members can tell us at a local level, their school administration and their school board and their superintendent, exactly what they have as a vision for what they want for their children. Because I think teachers feel that they have that picture, but the power is not with us. It just isn't. And we are a profession of rule followers. We tend to want to follow the rules that we're given. We want to advocate for change, but we also don't want to be unprofessional. We want to be professional people. We are professional people. So I think that making sure that teachers feel supported from the community when they do say, "Hey, let's maybe think about an alternative," would be good. And of course, writing your legislators and being advocates there. But I also think the conversation just has to spread. You have to talk to people, especially I can see some people going into education that I work with. But you have to be kind of crazy ranting about this. I tend to rant about all things. I ranted at Easter about how pickles aren't a garnish, and then I followed that up by ranting at 401s at our seminar about, "Oh, pickles are not a garnish." I rant about all things. They are not a garnish. They make everything taste like pickle, and I choose no pickle. But the point is, you have to, as passionate as I am about pickles, you have to be passionate about things that affect the world. And these are things that affect the world. You get these little humans that are like little lumps of clay that have all their own internal bubbling going on already, and then you get to put some of your own stamp on that, and you're just gonna let people who've never met them make a decision about what's important and what's not. No, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't let Governor Pence observe you at dinner time and then tell you how to raise your child. You wouldn't do it. So why are you okay with him and his legislators deciding that on a daily basis? You have to get that angry. As angry as you would be with the stranger who showed up next to you at O'Charlie's and said, "Why do you let your kid order fries?" That's how angry you have to be, because it's longer lasting than that encounter. And I would say that you have to have that analogy to all the people you talk to, and talk to all the people like a crazy person, to the point that you stop getting invited to things. Or you know you're not invited because they invited you, but they put pickles on your plate as a garnish. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more I can say than that. You just have to talk to everybody. You're going to have to be the most boring person at the party, just saying, "Hey, yeah, we're having a good time. Let's talk about education policy." But I mean, you're just going to have to go nonstop at every single person you know. And if you're about to become a teacher, you got to love every single second of it and prove them wrong constantly. We do it on a daily basis. We prove them wrong. And you gotta just take up the stand and do the same thing over and over and over again.
I'm glad to see somebody else missed a rant. I carry this around. I always try to go to the purple side that says, stay calm. You know, this is all racially.
It also says first option.
So I apologize that I didn't quite follow my little cheat sheet. It says unleash the rage. Back up your bread and butter. I think this is kind of where I'll talk about how to get a teacher elected to the State House. You know, I took this as, what's the solution? I've written, I've lobbied, I've emailed, I've talked to, I've been ignored by previous lawmakers from my area. I took time to go to visit them after I've emailed them, and they didn't even come out of their cubicle to speak to me. And that, to me, that's not democracy. That's not listening to a constituent. You know, you may not agree with me, but you at least owe me the respect to come out, meet with me when I drove down to the state capitol to see you. And about the time that the Super Bowl was here and legislation was going into right to work, there was also horrible legislation coming down the pipe for education. There was a gal in my area named Melanie Wright. She graduated from Anderson Highland High School, which is now a middle school because of the cuts I talked about earlier. And she's her school that she works in now is Dale, right down the road. And it's an AFT Indiana local. And she stood up that following spring in May and said, excuse my language, and I don't think she'll mind if I quote her, I'm pissed off as you know what, and I'm running for office. I don't know how to do it. What do I do? And this is that COPE guy, which stands for Committee on Political Education. The lobbyist says, I've got somebody. There she is. She's going to beat Mr. Lutz, who voted not once but twice to cut $300 million from the public education budget, which led to that building closing. And everybody in the community blamed the local school board. They did not know where the problem came from. And because I'm ranting Randy, the EFT guy, they didn't want to believe it. So the school board took the fall for it. So I put Melanie's name in the back of my mind, and the following fall, I went up and I handed her a napkin with my name on it, and all my other officers in the AFT. Excuse my language again. But I wrote KLAC, the Kick Lutz's Ass Campaign. And she looked at me and she goes, you're familiar, I remember seeing you. I said, we're going to get real familiar because this guy has done nothing but harm public education. I said, get in touch with us. So she ran one time and came up 444 votes short. It was discouraging. In the parking lot, that night, waiting for returns, we ran each other to go watch the returns together. She's in tears. She goes, I did not know it was this huge. What I just tried to do, excuse me now. But she came up short, and I told her, I said, don't lose sight of that. Terry Austin, who was in Anderson, and an AFT person, a professional development instructor for us in administration, is also my rep. Melanie Wright's not even my rep. She's on the fringes of my district that I'm in. Terry Austin lost her first time by a close margin too. And we've helped get her reelected every time. So Melanie, starting last May with the campaign season, so let me get my years right. It had to be 2013. She was elected now in 2014. She announced she would run again. And I got the heads up. And what do? I followed her. Randy, my district's in 2 counties now. Will you follow me to Delaware County and be there to say a few words on my behalf when I announce my campaign? It's going to be in Madison County this night. Randy, I'm going to speak in front of this retiree group. Will you be there? Randy, I've got to meet with these people. Randy, and Randy starts talking to his other teachers. Anybody that's willing to wear out a pair of shoes. And you do that. You knock on door after door after door. You give up a little bit of time. You go meet in front of retirees. I started building, for our local, I started building coalitions. If there was a luncheon with a retiree group at the Union Hall or at the Bingo Hall or wherever, I went, I wore a Melanie Wright shirt, I handed out her literature. I said, this is what's going on with education. This is why she's running as a teacher. And truth be known, she probably was more of a Republican than a Democrat before she ran, but she had to run on a Democrat ticket because the Republicans were going to protect Mr. Lutz. So we started building that coalition, and she was a candidate that went out and was driven. If one door was closed in her face negatively, she was going to go knock on 10 more. I know I knocked on probably close to 2,000 to 3,000 doors in the 2 years, and every second was worth it. That gal knocked on probably 10,000 to 15,000 doors, and she sits now in District 35, which was supposedly a safe seat. Mr. Lutz's party told him it was safe. We're not going to give you much money for media or campaign. They're gerrymandered, you're safe, you're good, and we won. It's manpower. They've got money, they've got the rhetoric, they've got the commercials. It's surrounding yourself with a group of people, a great candidate, and you sacrifice. I drove all the way from Anderson to be here today to share all of what I've said because public education is under attack, it's been discriminated against, and it's in jeopardy of being gone in this state. Definitely in my area. And that's why I come here for. Melanie Wright gave those sacrifices on the campaign trail. It's my time to repay a little bit. And that's what you do. I mean, there's plenty of things. Yeah, you need a little bit of money. You get your organization together, you build up a little bit of money, but we partnered with groups to put on fundraisers because we couldn't hand out $10,000, $20,000 campaign checks. So we would give $200 or $300 as an organization to be in this fundraiser, which might get her $1,200 at the end of the fundraiser. And you get people going on social media, and you just work relentlessly. You refuse to say no, to let it happen. And I learned that too from Glenda Ritz. I said, Glenda, how do you do it? How do you keep your sanity? She goes, Randy, they can close 20 doors in my face. I'm going to try to open the 21st door. And that's what it is. It just has to, not everybody's going to be as involved as I am, as a Melanie Wright, as a Dr. Killion, as these people. But those of us that have the time, the energy, the passion, and the resources to do that, it's our calling. We have to. And you can find a few foot soldiers to jump on board and to do it, and you can make things happen. I know I've probably gone longer than I should have, but that is kind of my forte. I just decided, I know the policy, I know it's unfair, and I know how I can knock on a door, I can hand out a flyer, and if I can get a few people to follow me and a great candidate, we can get it done.
For ending on that call to action, and can I have a round of applause? Continue the conversation. You can let us know on the survey, and also Rocky, did you want to talk about the DVDs?
By DVD, we have about 2 hours of extra footage on a variety of topics, charters, vouchers, politicians. So I think you'll enjoy it. We've got people out there.
Thank you all. Sorry if I